Managed Mentoring Guide for Getting Started in Beekeeping. This is Record Keeping. Thanks for watching. I am Kevin England. In this lesson, we'll talk about the importance of keeping hive records, how a succession of records informs you on a hive progression, techniques for keeping records and action item plans, working biology into your management practices, and adapting a style that suits you. Record keeping is something that comes naturally for some, and it is a struggle for others. In this lesson, we'll give you some practical suggestions for developing a system that can work for you. The first question one has to ask oneself is, do you really need a system? Whether you have 2 hives or you have 20, I say your practice as a beekeeper will benefit from having some form of notes or records. It's kind of a 2-part system. The first part is documenting what you've seen, and that leads to the second part, which is tracking what you should do next. I rarely encounter someone who doesn't talk about how many things they have on their schedule. The first dynamic that you'll encounter with keeping track of hive inspections is that you simply will not remember the finite details. Another dynamic you will encounter is that it all runs together over time. In reflecting back on any given hive inspection, after you've done a good number of them through the season, history will prove it's hard to keep track because your memory will skew towards blending the details together, and then makes it hard for you to trace your steps. For that purpose, in order to stay organized and to carry on with the right plan, it is really important that you document what you see at the time you're encountering it. To lead by example, I almost make it a ritual to take the notes of a hive inspection as soon as I put the roof back over the box. I do not, as a practice, go into the next hive until I've recorded accurate notes for the one that I've just worked. Now, I'm not perfect at this, and I kick myself every time I screw it up. This angst serves to remind me to get in the habit of having good discipline around this. Trust me when I tell you that even an hour of time will completely cloud the recollection of what you've done, and doing it in the moment is a far superior way to go. For the game plan, the notes you take at that moment lead you to an action plan for future inspections. And you may do as I do and structure a plan on a hive-by-hive basis as demonstrated on the slide. I know that if I have a lot of work to do, I will write out the objectives of what I plan to do for each hive, along with the listing of the equipment that's required to do the job. I absolutely loathe ever having to walk away from the apiary and go back into my storage area to get a piece of equipment that I'm missing. It's not good beekeeping, and it's not good for the bees. We highly encourage you to develop a system that's maintained across the beekeeping season. We are all likely to have the mental ability to think that we could trace the timeline of hive progression, but keeping records of a colony's path over a full season and even into next season becomes something that is very difficult to maintain with any degree of accuracy. You will find that to do this well, you really have to commit to the practice. As an aside, I find that one added benefit of adapting the practice of writing things down is that when I take notes, it somewhat solidifies more accurately in my memory what happened with each colony. One logical question when you commit to taking notes is, what details should you record? To what level of specificity? Certainly 2 of the basic things are weather conditions and the physical setup of the hive stack. Tracking the changes in setup might seem an odd notion, but if you think about it, the progression of a hive, it starts with a single box and then it becomes 2 boxes. In time you might add a feeder, in time you might add some honey supers, in time you might take away some honey supers, and at any given point you may add an entrance reducer. These are just a few of the things that can occur to demonstrate that hive configurations change all the time. You keep track of hive state to know what comes next and to trace what your management plan was. Coming back to weather, it might seem an odd notion to track the weather conditions, but weather has a large influence at times on how the bees behave. Actually, I start my sessions with recording the weather and time of inspection before I even smoke the hive. For me, this practice serves as a specific prompt to take a pause when I write the temperature down to think about what will happen to the bees when I open the box at the temperature I just recorded. Taking that notion a little bit further, it gives me a moment to think, wow, it's really cold and I don't want to have them open too long. Or it's 90 degrees and if I wanted to take a little more time to do some cleanup of the hive inside, that'd probably be fine with the bees, given what the temperature is. Now, there's a whole manner of things one could observe while reading through the frames. Did you see the queen? Make a notation. What is the food situation? Make a notation. How are the bees? Are they calm or nervous? Were they trying to sting you? How did this compare to the last inspection? All of these things are viable things to keep track of as you go through a colony. One of the fundamentals of any given inspection is to keep some notes on what you did, supplemented by the rationale of why. Remember that you might be looking at this record 6 months from now, and capturing the supporting rationale will help support what you were doing at the time. Of course, it seems patently obvious that you should keep a running list of any action items that you identify, things to be addressed the next time you come out to work the hive. You might ask, what exact mechanism do you use to do this? That is probably the most personal preference of anything in beekeeping. There's absolutely no standard as to the manner in which you should take notes. If you're looking for suggestions on how beekeepers do it, it runs the gamut. Some beekeepers write a journal in a journaling book, one page after another. Other beekeepers fill out forms for every single inspection. Some beekeepers use software on their phone, and others write themselves notes with a Sharpie marker on top of the lid, the metal cover lid on top of the beehive. This is where I get to say, you do you. Case in point, if you've not figured this out about me, I'm a very detailed person. I went as far as designing a personal form. It took me several iterations and a few years of practice to get it down, and that's what's on the screen. I tried to make it like a test-taking form. I take a highlighter and fill in the boxes to select what I see. This cuts down on the physical writing and is a far quicker and efficient process. And when I say you do you, this is how I do me. I really like the form and I use it all the time. Yeah, poking a little fun at my type A personality, I had to insert a Kevin moment. Did you notice that I put the inspection form on the image? Yeah, I spent a few precious moments to reshape the image so that the form is superimposed to represent the document for the previous slide. Just some stupid fun for a passing, fleeting moment, and that is an end of a Kevin moment. Incidentally, I know that beekeepers always ask me if they can have a copy of the form. The answer is, of course. There will be a link to a download of the form in the notes for a lesson, or you can go to bkcorner.org. There's a link on the right side rail if that's useful to you. There's times when I don't want to fuss with printing paper forms and taking them out in a clipboard and filling them out and dealing with all of that. And I like to keep things electronically. So one thing that I've evolved to do recently is to record notes verbally on my cell phone. I can record the basics of a fundamental hive inspection in under 2 minutes. And at a later date, I'll sit at my computer, open up the electronic form of my hive inspection sheet and do it that way. I'm so familiar with my hive inspection sheet that I can relay the details verbally in the same format as a form, and while listening in 2 minutes, just go down and check all the boxes. Now, sometimes I do things verbally out in the apiary, and other times I use the paper form. If I have a lot to do, I typically use the shorter window of time and record verbally. Of course, if you fill out paper forms or verbal forms, you have the obligation to transform or store them somewhere in a method that works for you, and verbally you have to transcribe at a later date. I always label all my hive inspections on my phone with the date and pad number of the hive that I'm working with, And if I haven't got a chance to transcribe, I can go back and listen to it verbally on my phone in about 2 minutes. All of this to illustrate that it's really personal preference, and we've been saying you'll have to develop a process that works for you. Now, coming back to center, there's an intangible benefit of record keeping in a novel way that your notes are tied together with bee biology, kind of like Sherlock Holmes. As you begin to build a dossier of notes, you'll start to be able to interpret the clues and learn more about the biology as you go. You observe that you can recognize if things are progressing biologically simply by following your notes on the timeline. In time, records of your observations teach you about how a colony grows and contracts over the course of a season, or maybe what happens to a colony when, for example, some unintended event occurs, say the supersedure of a queen. You could track how a colony manifests when impacted by varroa mites or disease if you take reasonable notes. Coming back to Sherlock Holmes, your notes should provide you all the clues that you require, and you can't gather that when in the moment, but collectively they add up to something. You could even couple them with models, like the one that's illustrated in the life cycle of varroa mites as documented by the Honeybee Health Coalition, the form that's on the screen. Mysteries unfold with good notes. Probably the most sage wisdom you will get in this lesson being repeated is that you have to do something that is suitable to your style. Every person is different. Every person will go about this in their own way. And if you try to adapt a style that is not suitable to you, you will likely not carry through with keeping reasonable notes. Try a style and see how it works for you. If you find that you're not consistent, then switch to something else, but find something that suits you. And along the way, make sure that you follow the recommendations on the screen. At the beginning of every session, I find it helpful to review the notes from the previous session to build an action plan and to mentally form a plan of attack. I find that my hive inspections are far more efficient if I preconceive what I plan to do versus simply smoke and go. If you find discontent after doing a hive inspection, or you're running back to get equipment and leaving the hive open, then you're doing something wrong and you need to consider some process improvement. Many of these things are often fixed by a better plan. In this lesson, we made the case for finding a path to building record keeping into your program. In our experience, the more adept beekeepers will always present us with evidence by some means of record keeping as to what's been going on in their operation. I'm always in appreciation for someone who has a good track record of what's been happening and find that these beekeepers grasp what has happened and are better prepared to figure out what comes next. By our estimation, we have discovered that those who adapt the practice of taking notes achieve long-lasting skills that lead to becoming competent beekeepers. It's really an important aspect of keeping bees. Turning to our next lesson, it's time to talk about varroa mites. We'll learn about the varroa mite biology and dynamics, along with guidance on building potential treatment plans should you need them this summer. We will then turn to laying out a plan for summer management. It's time to say if you have questions, you can ask at our next online session. You can also send an email to the address on the slide. If you're watching from YouTube, you can leave a comment below. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you at the next lesson.